So my name is Eric Toupin. I'm a senior developer at Atten Design Group, and I've been working with Atten for a little more than 15 years. I'm also the lead developer for Solo and Seed Funding. That's Stanford on and off campus learning opportunities and Stanford Seed Funding. And I have been the lead developer in those projects since their inception around 7 years ago. We've been partnered with Stanford's Research, Information Technology, and Innovation team since way back then in 2015, working on these two platforms. So today I'll be talking about upgrading Drupal 7 websites to Backdrop CMS. And I'll be using those two sites that I just mentioned, Solo and Seed Funding, as a case study. So this is Stanford on and off campus learning opportunities. It's one of the websites that I will be talking about today. And this one is Stanford Seed Funding. The other site that myself and Joel Steidel, Director of Engineering at Atten, who's also on this call, recently we converted these two sites from Drupal 7 to Backdrop CMS. You can actually take a look at these live at solo.stanford.edu or Seed Funding, spelled how it sounds, at stanford.edu. So today I'm going to talk about four things. First, what is Backdrop and why would you use it? Another, who stands to gain the most from using Backdrop? Then we'll talk about our specific case studies, and then we'll finish up with the outcome of our projects and the outlook for those projects moving forward. Before I step into that structure, I put kind of a cheat slide in here. I want to talk just a little bit about, see if I can move this Zoom thing. There we go. I want to talk a little bit about the end of life for Drupal 7. So I call this slide the end of the Drupal 7 world. And I'm pretty sure that everyone on this call, on this webinar, knows a little bit about Drupal 7 end of life. Some interesting things specifically about Drupal 7. Drupal 7 represents more than a decade of conceptual continuity. And what I mean by that is that it has been a stable released version for more than 10 years. Tons of people have been building with Drupal 7, creating custom modules, collaborating around projects, and creating tons and tons of documentation on Stack Overflow and all across the internet. So of course, it's no surprise that hundreds of thousands of websites still use Drupal 7. We all know that Drupal 7 end of life is imminent. That's happened a couple of times, but most recently, it is going to be end of lifing in November of next year. Just a quick note about what end of life actually means. Drupal 7 does not turn into a pumpkin. It just means that security patches are no longer released and that there's no longer security support for Drupal 7. The Drupal 7 upgrade path to 8, 9, and 10, there is a traditional upgrade path from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8 or Drupal 9. The thing that's specifically interesting to us here is that it's not really an upgrade, it's a rebuild. So if you're going to upgrade from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8 or 9, you're going to be rebuilding your site from the ground up, rebuilding all of those features. And of course, their associated costs. That's going to be something similar to perhaps the original cost of building. So two questions that would be great for everyone here to keep in mind as we go through this. One is this truly feasible? Is a rebuild for your organization really feasible? And I think the answer for a lot of folks is that it is that they have a plan already. They've set aside a team, funding, time, and are really ready to make that transition to, I guess, now Drupal 9. The next question would be, is it desirable? And all I mean here is if you could accomplish a lot of the same things for a fraction of the cost, is it worth considering? So let's get back to our actual outline and start off with what is Backdrop and why would you use it? So a bit of a spoiler for the rest of this presentation, I will be positioning Backdrop CMS as an economic option for your Drupal 7 upgrade. If you don't remember anything else from this webinar, the one takeaway would be that you can spend a fraction of your estimated rebuild cost on upgrading to Backdrop CMS instead of rebuilding in Drupal 9, in Joomla, and WordPress, or whatever it is that you might be moving to. A lot of people, when they hear Backdrop, they think, oh, isn't that something that came out to kind of fix the Drupal 7 end of life issue? That's not really the case. Backdrop has been around for quite a long time, since 2015. And since 2015, it has been a secure, viable, and supported product. So Backdrop is viable, secure, and innovative, and it is committed to a direct upgrade path from Drupal 7. So what I mean by those things specifically, viable, if you have a Drupal 7 website, it's going to work in Backdrop CMS. There are no questions about that. Secure, Backdrop CMS has had their own dedicated security team since their inception in 2015, and they have continually released security patches since that time, and will be into the foreseeable future. Innovative, Backdrop isn't just a Drupal 7 end-of-life option. They've actually revamped some major portions of the Drupal 7 code base. Things like configuration, caching, the layout builder system are all brand new. Backdrop was based on Drupal 7. So for developers in the room, that means that it was a fork of the Drupal 7 code some time ago. For non-developers, the way that you can think about this is modern Drupal 7 and modern Backdrop CMS share an ancestor. So 7 years ago, when Backdrop was duplicated from the Drupal 7 code base, since then, the two projects have kind of evolved in their own directions for several years. You can think about that kind of like maybe humans and chimpanzees sharing a common ancestor, theoretically. And I think in this case, I would be pushing that Backdrop CMS is the human. Some specific interesting pieces about Backdrop. I think one big thing is philosophy. So I would highly recommend anyone here on this webinar today, take a look at backdropcms.org/philosophy. Backdrop is built for users. And normally when we talk about users, we're talking about users on your website, users interacting with your content, buying your products, et cetera. In this case, we're talking about Backdrop CMS users. So folks who are building websites with Backdrop CMS. Backdrop is made to be very easy for folks who are using the GUI, the point and click interface, to build websites. After that, their second priority is contributors. So people who are building modules, extensions, et cetera. And then their last priority is the core team that's keeping everything running. But the idea is that it's least complex for builders and module developers. Some other principles that are really interesting on that philosophy page, I just pulled out a couple that are applicable to this talk. One is backwards compatible. So Backdrop is committed to being backwards compatible with Drupal 7, period. So the upgrade path will be easy. Backdrop's also easy to learn. It is secure, and it's fast. It's a lot faster than Drupal 7 in a lot of metrics. Please do take a look at the philosophy page to see if Backdrop is something that kind of fits with how you think about your organization. One other note here is that the Backdrop team is small, but Backdrop, while the community is pretty small, has been supported since 2015. So we're talking more than 100 core developers, more than 100 contrib developers at any given time, and a dedicated security team. Also, Backdrop, the current version of Backdrop 1 is supported for the foreseeable future, at the very least until 2025 and beyond, and the forthcoming version of Backdrop with a seamless upgrade from Backdrop 1 to Backdrop 2 being the ultimate goal. So we talked a little bit about what is Backdrop. It's a fork of the Drupal 7 code base. It is viable. It's innovative compared to Drupal 7. Why you might use it is because it's an economic option. It is an excellent option for upgrading from Drupal 7. And then let's talk about who should use Backdrop. So having just completed this upgrade in the last couple of months, perhaps I'm a little bit biased, but to me, if you're on Drupal 7, Backdrop is worth considering. If you don't have an existing plan, if you don't already have your Drupal 9 upgrade funded, resourced, set on the calendar at some point, I think Backdrop is a really excellent solution. If you like your existing platform, if your website works the way you want it to, and you just don't want to deal with the upcoming end-of-life issues, then Backdrop's a great solution. And if you're hesitant about a complete rebuild right now, if you feel like the end of life for Drupal 7 is kind of forcing you to redesign and rebuild, and you're really not ready for that, I think Backdrop's the right solution. One final note here is you do want to make sure that your development team, whether that's an internal team or partners, vendors, whatever the case may be, are willing and capable of building in Backdrop CMS. Capable, the answer is yes. Backdrop is aimed at intermediate developers. And if you've ever worked in Drupal 8 or 9 or 7, you can absolutely build in Backdrop. In talking to some of the Backdrop folks about upgrades from Drupal 7, one thing that they seem pretty clear about is that the most distinct savings happen at the two ends of the complexity spectrum. So for very simple Drupal 7 websites, you're going to see an extremely easy upgrade path. If your Drupal 7 website is primarily built with core modules or with popular and well-supported contributed modules, if you don't really have a development team right now, or you have a small development team, then it's likely that you can expect a very fast upgrade with little or no development, potentially just a point-and-click interface. A quick note here is that theme upgrades are technical. So Backdrop CMS does not have a point-and-click upgrade path for themes. If you have a custom theme, a developer is going to need to upgrade that to Backdrop CMS. If you don't, if you have just a regular theme that you're kind of out of the box, it's possible that Backdrop already has a converted option. You can check it backdropcms.org/themes. And if you're willing to choose something comparable, then again, we fall back into that category of very fast point-and-click upgrade. Take a look at backdropcms.org/modules and backdropcms.org/themes to see if the modules in your website and the themes in your website are available in Backdrop. So let's talk about the far other end of the spectrum, which is extremely complicated Drupal 7 websites. And that's what I'll be talking about today with this case study. So for Drupal 7 websites that are highly complex, extremely customized, if you already have a development team or there's people continuing to work on this and they're flexible, they're willing to work in a new language, this is going to be dramatically more cost-effective than a rebuild. So the upgrade is going to be a lot slower than that point-and-click process that I just talked about. And it's likely to include upgrading some contributed modules that don't yet exist in Backdrop CMS. It will likely include code refactoring of all of your custom code. And there's a little bit of a learning curve to learn Backdrop CMS. It's a little different than Drupal 7 and Drupal 9. In this case, both module and theme upgrades are going to be technical. So I'm assuming if you have a complex site, you also have a custom theme, that's going to need to be upgraded, and all of your custom modules are going to need to be upgraded. All this considered, learning curve, upgrade, everything considered, it is still going to be dramatically more cost-effective than a rebuild. If ongoing support is a consideration, if you are thinking about converting your site but wondering how to support it moving forward, you can always take a look at backdropcms.org/support/resources to check out which developers are available to work on Backdrop projects. So we've talked about what Backdrop is. It's an economic solution for your Drupal 7 website. It's an innovative platform. You might use it because it's such an economic solution. Specifically, if you have a very simple site like a blog or just a primarily content publishing site, or if you have a custom platform that you've been working on for years that is very complex, those are the categories that are really going to see a lot of savings here. And now let's talk a little bit about our case studies. So the two sites that we just recently converted. So I'm going to go through a couple of slides here. And what I'm trying to emphasize with these is the complexity of the sites that we just recently converted. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to set up an autoplay here. And as we walk through a couple of these slides, let's see, I'm going to talk about some of the features of this website. Let's see here. All right. Cool. So that should play in just a second here. The screens that we're looking at walk through a program officer, which is a kind of user, creating an opportunity and an application form for that opportunity. We're looking right here at Stanford on and off campus learning opportunities. It's very similar to Stanford seed funding. They're aimed at completely different audiences, have some different features, but there are a lot of similarities. These platforms represent 7 years of ongoing development, and they facilitate complex application management workflows that were developed specifically for Stanford faculty, Stanford staff, and Stanford students. Both platforms are highly customized. We use more than 60 contributed modules with custom configurations. We have created nearly 40 custom modules in the past 7 years to serve a variety of features. Both sites include 2 custom API integrations. One is with the Stanford Profiles API, which pulls over data about Stanford personnel, Stanford faculty, when they create a profile on the site. The other integration is with middleware and integration services, which pulls student records from Stanford University and attaches those to applications when students apply for opportunities. These sites both use single sign-on. That's with SUNET login for Stanford. And we're also bringing over some data about who users are as they log into the site to figure out if they're students, if they're faculty, and how we should customize the experience for them. These sites focus on application management, and program officers can manage dozens, hundreds more of applications at a time. Those applications can be rendered into PDFs on the fly. So as program officers are managing 100 applications from 100 students, they can download those as PDFs for easy browsing, easy reviewing. Our download manager that generates those PDFs on the fly can also generate CSVs so that program officers can integrate CSV data into their own spreadsheets, however they want to use that information. Both of these sites have a few more than 5 distinct user roles, and each user role has its unique capabilities and experiences on the site. So for example, we have program officers, which is what we were looking at the beginning here, who create opportunities, create application forms, collect applications. We have applicants who apply to these opportunities. We have student program officers, which can join the program officers team and help them manage their content. We have reviewers that are third-party reviewers for these applications. And we have recommenders who can upload assets to recommend applicants. And those are the 5 major roles. There are a couple of other ones, but they're not really worth talking about in this particular webinar. We also use quite a few customized notifications. So there's a couple of dozen notifications that get sent out automatically to program officers or applicants or reviewers when certain things happen, when the next step needs to be taken to kind of usher these users through the process. Since their inception, Solo and seed funding have seen more than 18,000 Stanford users, and we have published and advertised more than 1,000 opportunities. Also, in a month, at the very high end of the scale, we see around 20,000 visits and around 275,000 pages served. So all of that was to say, you can see my autoplay ran a little long there. All of that was to say that these 2 platforms that we're talking about fall squarely into that very complicated category on the complex side of that gradient. So for these particular projects, let's take a look at outcome and outlook. So before we get too specific about the outcome for our Backdrop CMS upgrade for these 2 Drupal 7 sites, I want to first look at a likely alternative. So these platforms were developed over 7 years of ongoing rapid development cycles. We have been releasing new features every month or 2 months for 7 years, significant features. Application management covers 7 to 8 distinct phases. There's 7 on one site and 8 on the other. And each phase of application management includes handfuls of features. A little more about complexity here. So in order to manage testing and make sure that that all of our features work as we continue to release features year after year after year, we have introduced some automated functional tests, which were originally written in Selenium, or a Selenium-based platform we were using. And we've now moved to Cypress. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The reason I'm mentioning that is, okay, so Selenium-based tests, the way this works is it's kind of like a script or like a robot running your browser, and it actually loads up the site. It logs in as a user, an applicant or program officer, or whatever the case may be, and it goes through their tasks, filling out forms, clicking on save, et cetera, and making sure that everything works as expected. So our automated tests cover about 85% of features. And when I run them on my local machine to make sure everything's working, they're running in like a 0 lag environment. Page loads are just one after the other, bam, bam, bam. And running those tests that way takes more than 30 minutes to test all of our different suites of features. There are more than 70 suites of features and thousands of test cases. So last year, when we started thinking, okay, what are we going to do about Drupal 7 end of life? One of our first thoughts was Drupal 9. And a conservative estimate of rebuilding these platforms with all of these features in Drupal 9 at that time was 3,500 to 4,000 hours. So to put that in perspective, at Design Group, that would be a 4-person team working full-time for around 5 months. So we decided to go with Backdrop CMS, and I'll talk a little bit about how that process went for us. Before I dive into that, I do want to recognize that there were actually a lot of difficult moments. So this is not, what's the term, cake and ice cream, rainbows and unicorns. This is not a super easy upgrade path. for us, because we had 7 years of custom code, custom modules, et cetera, there were some really difficult moments. And some of the modules that we needed in Backdrop were not yet available. So things like encrypt, simple SAML PHP, which we use for single sign-on, the CapEx module that we use to integrate with Stanford profiles. Those were a couple of the ones that when myself and Joel were looking at them, well, I can't speak for Joel, but certainly myself, I thought like, man, are we really going to be able to do this in the time that we hope to accomplish it in? So there were definitely some difficult moments. All that said, it did turn out really well. So our Backdrop CMS upgrade path included preliminary module conversions for 17 contrib modules. Let me just clarify that real quick. So we use 61 modules that were contributed in the Drupal 7 space. Of those 61, 17 did not have a Backdrop CMS version. We converted all 17 to a level of quality that works for us. So those 17 are not yet available to the rest of the community. We do have Pioneer versions for around 10 of those. And what I mean by Pioneer is that they are available on the Backdrop CMS contributed space on GitHub, but they aren't version 1 yet. So I think, you know, developers, folks that know what they're doing could absolutely download those and use those, but they aren't quite ready for public consumption. If anybody in this room is interested in helping with that, please do get in touch. It would be absolutely awesome to have some help pushing those the final mile. Our Backdrop CMS also included, of course, converting all of our own custom modules. So there was 38 custom modules to convert. We did a complete overhaul of some of our legacy systems. So for example, we were heavily using context in Drupal 7. Context is a module that governs the logic that decides what content appears on what page based on URLs, based on user roles, or whatever the case may be. It doesn't exist in Backdrop CMS. And so we ended up writing a bit of a custom solution for that, as well as integrating with some new Backdrop CMS stuff. In addition to the 17 contrib modules that we had to change over, all of our 40 custom modules, or 38 custom modules, some of these overhauled old systems, there was also around 250 changes throughout the code base that don't fall into those categories. What I mean by this is that as I was going through making these changes, anytime that I made a considerable change that wasn't just part of a module, I left a comment in the code that said like Backdrop CMS change. And then later, at the end of this process, counting those up, there was about 250 of them. Another quick note is that Backdrop CMS does include a really cool layout building system, but we didn't take full advantage of it in this project. So for time and resources reasons, we stuck with a lightweight kind of conversion process, which helped us get to where we're going quicker, but doesn't take advantage of the layout system. So our entire Backdrop CMS upgrade took 1.5 developers. What I mean by that is myself full-time and Joel Steidel a little less than half-time. It took us 3 calendar months with vacation time. So we worked October of last year, November of last year, and December of last year, but half of December is vacation time for Stanford, and our team ended up taking about the same amount of time as well. In total, the entire upgrade took us 550 hours. And inside of those 550 hours, we were able to complete a variety of non-Backdrop related tasks, which I'll touch on in a second here. And I just want to kind of reflect that against what I mentioned a second ago. Our estimate in Drupal 9 was 3,500 to 4,000 hours. And @InDesign Group has done tons of Drupal 9 builds and Drupal 9 upgrades. So this is a very educated guess, I should say. So I called this slide Room to Breathe. And what I mean by this is that we selected Backdrop CMS, the @IN team and the Stanford team together in order to create more flexibility and in order to have more flexibility around our resources. And what we discovered was there actually was tons of flexibility. We ended up spending a fraction on the rebuild and had room to do some other things that weren't even part of the Backdrop upgrade. So inside of our 550 hours, we ended up completely adapting our code base to work with Pantheon.io, excellent hosting provider that in this case helps us with uptime and also with performance. But there were some specific changes we needed to make to our code so that it would work on Pantheon. We also completed our entire migration and cutover from our legacy hosting provider to Pantheon during this 550 hours. Anyone who's done a production migration, especially for a big site that's been around for 7 years, has 18,000 users, knows it's a big deal. So that was quite a big lift inside of those hours as well. And then also those tests that I mentioned a little while ago were originally written in a Selenium-based solution. And we decided to switch those to Cypress.js just because it's a little bit more modern, reads and writes a little bit more like code, a little bit easier to understand. And that was rewrites of 70 plus suites of tests into Cypress.js. So all of those changes and our Backdrop CMS upgrade all fit inside of 550 hours. A little bit about where we are today with Solo and seed funding. So those sites went live on Backdrop in mid-January. And if you do take a visit at solo.stanford.edu or seedfunding.stanford.edu, you're looking at Backdrop sites that have been up and running and well used for several months now. So Solo and seed funding are secure. They are supported by the Backdrop community and by, of course, that design group. And they are PHP 8 ready. So Backdrop CMS version 1 is completely PHP 8 ready. So we're not only not worrying about Drupal 7 end of life, but also PHP 7 end of life. Both platforms are ready for and already recipients of ongoing feature development. And all I mean there is that we have already picked up our sprint cycle again and have been able to release new features on those platforms already. Solo and SSF both perform 50% better than they were performing before. And that's averaged by, or that's measured by average page load time. So on our legacy hosting, we were doing around 3-second page loads on average. That is an average for some of the complex tasks that program officers do. It's actually quite a bit more, but then just visiting the front page, it's pretty quick. But before we were doing a 3-second average, now we're doing a 2-second average. And I think that's, the responsibility there is shared between Backdrop CMS and Pantheon, but certainly the caching system for Backdrop CMS and the new config system has quite a bit to do with that. And then our entire upgrade from Drupal 7 to Backdrop CMS after working for 7 years on this platform and these nice to haves, PHP 8 ready, faster than before, moved to Pantheon, rebuilt our testing suites, all of that was achieved for 15% of our estimated rebuild cost. So in my opinion, if you have a Drupal 7 website and you're thinking about what to do next, it is absolutely worth considering a Backdrop CMS upgrade. That's everything that I have for the core of this presentation. If you have questions that you think of after this webinar, or if you would like to collaborate around releasing some of those modules that I mentioned, or really anything about Backdrop CMS upgrades, please feel free to get in touch at work@atten.io or directly with me at eric@atten.io.